Got me now, right?
We've got you. So to get us started, hello and welcome to the 2025 UAGC Culture of Care Summit. I'm Dana Dillard, Program Chair of the Master of Arts and Doctor of Psychology programs, co-hosting today's session with Dr. Dan Augusto, Program Chair of the Bachelor of Arts in Homeland Security and Emergency Management and Culture of Care Summit co-chair. We are pleased to welcome you to the From Policy to Practice, Daring to Live the Culture of Care Pillars, a panel discussion with Theresa Sunblade, Student Advising Manager, Nichole Salinas, Director of Student Reengagement, Bill Davis, Program Chair of the Bachelor of Arts in Operations Management and Analysis, and Dr. William Woods, Professor in the Master of Arts in Organizational Management and the Master of Business Administration. Dan and I are delighted to help facilitate this engaging discussion. We're going to start with the pillar of communicate, which relates to UAGC's commitment to timely, professional, and transparent communication. Nichole, I'd love to put you on the spot and invite you to begin the conversation. What mechanisms exist for us to truly listen to understand rather than just to respond when communicating with students?
Thank you. Thank you for introducing me. This might be my favorite topic to discuss, so I'm excited to kick us off. Stephen Covey, an influential speaker and author who made an incredible impact in effective leadership and communication, shared that the biggest challenge when it comes to communication is that most people do not listen with the intent to understand. They listen with the intent to reply. So in a conversation, you might notice that you're just can't wait, for your opportunity to jump in and share your point. But that means you might be missing out on really understanding the other person and their viewpoint that they're trying to share with you as well. I love that we have tools in place for our teams to communicate with students in a way that truly elicits that understanding. And one of those tools is the service model. The service model influences every interaction that we have with students on the re-engagement team. This includes phone calls, emails, even text messages, and live chat. Our goal is always to create a consistent experience for students where they feel heard and understood. Students really help us to recognize when our policies or processes may have become a barrier to their educational journey. And we miss out on understanding the experience of the student when we are focused solely on how to respond to situations based on our general understanding of the policy. What if real student situations are not used to inform our policies? And how do policies promote a culture of care experience without that insight from students? So the service model isn't a checklist and it certainly doesn't need to be followed in a specific order, but I do believe great conversations have been achieved by doing just that because it's based on a natural flow of a conversation. The first phase is engagement, and that's established by creating an environment for students that's welcoming. It provides them that sense of community and belonging. It gives students that sense of assurance that they can be open and honest with the person on the other line. Do they believe that we truly care about their issue or their experience at UAGC? Do they feel that we are trying to understand them? I often tell advisors if they're unsure, how to achieve this, they can simply focus on one or more of the three C's. And I'm not sure if I made this up or learned this along the way, but I call that collaboration, complement, or commonality. So as they're connecting with the student, are they finding ways to collaborate with them on their issue? Are they finding ways to complement the student in, their successes here at UAGC? Are they finding a commonality, some way to bond with the student where the student feels like you do understand me? The next phase is discovery. Once we've built that rapport and established trust, an advisor is able to focus on discovering what that student really needs to be successful. And discovery from a culture of care mindset means listening to what the student is saying and what they're not saying. The advisor will holistically review the student's file to ensure they're uncovering barriers that the student might be facing, and they'll celebrate the student's successes and identify what keeps the student motivated, and they'll collaborate with the student to identify goals that the student's UAGC community can support them in achieving. The next phase is advisement. Our advising at UAGC is always customized to the students that we're working with. We need to understand how to apply a policy or a process to that student's specific circumstances, and the student should leave that conversation with a really good understanding of how to follow that process. This allows the student to be an active participant in their education, which is why this phase is instrumental to the student's success. If we do not understand the student and their needs, we cannot provide customized advisement. And that custom approach is what demonstrates care. The final phase of the service model is commitment. I strongly believe that we are all committed to the success of our students at UAGC, but what does that really mean? Do we share consistent, clear messages with our students? And does the student leave our interaction with a very strong understanding of their next steps that the advisor is responsible for taking, as well as the student is responsible for taking? That action plan is really vital to creating a collaborative experience where the student knows they are a part of a team that focuses on their success.
Thank you, Nichole. That's fantastic. I love seeing that connection from policy to action. Bill, I'd like to put you on the spot as well. Can you elaborate on the pillar of communicate by sharing strategies instructors can use to create an environment where students feel comfortable asking questions and sharing feedback?
I sure will, but I'll tell you, Nicole's a tough act to follow because I know she does it so well. What I would just like to say is, the first thing you want to do as you're communicating, though, is always remember your purpose, why you're there. Schlossberg's mattering theory, but we want to know students are the most important person at our university. Without them, we're not here. So we're providing a service, we're providing value, we're providing coaching. And so we want to lead with purpose. And, the thing that I keep in my mind all the time, it's always there, is, lead with purpose, lead with empathy, lead with compassion, caring. Use your EQ to see where you might be needed, but take some time, pause, and kind of get a feel for who's in front of you. And also, too, you want to engage, and I think that is very important where I develop a lot of initial rapport because first impressions are lasting, bad ones last longer, right? So that first engagement with a student is very important in the introduction form. So I get to know a little bit about what they're about, their history, the context, maybe why they're there. They may share a story, but some of them I'll go deeper and engage them deeper too. I may decide to send a separate email, or I may want to boost some confidence if I see somebody's maybe a little bit on the fence and not sure of themselves. I want to create that sense of belonging and believing so that they get energized, right? Because that's what we're here to do. We're here to serve and to educate and lift and lead and so forth. So I think when you're consistent, you model consistency, when you have the attitude of leading and lifting and equipping others, and then understanding that we have to be positive, right? We want to be engaged so that we understand the situation. And we got to remember we're nurturing them through a whole transformation here, in a classroom. We're getting them to the end of that class toward their degree. So I just think it's so important to be consistent. And I think it's so important to model because they're modeling us, so if they have a tough situation and we don't necessarily react right, or we don't use the right tone or the pitch or the, deliver the right words at the right time, sometimes for those that may be struggling a little bit or in the middle, we might not be building that self-efficacy and confidence that we want to do. So my opinion, be genuine and authentic, just like Nichole was there, and work together and communicate and connect.
Fantastic. Thank you, Bill. Let's move into the second pillar, advocate, which refers to policies and practices at UAGC that are embedded in a commitment to equitable practices that include diverse perspectives across departments within the university. Dr. Woods, I'm sorry. From time to time, students benefit when either a faculty or staff member advocates for them in a difficult situation. Can you share an example of this?
Sure, I can. And I have to preface it a little bit from the standpoint of a lot of students that I advocate for don't even know that I'm advocating for them. Because, I have a whole lot of associate faculty that I'm helping in the classroom and beyond the classroom. And so a lot of times when there's a concern with a student, it will be with the associate faculty. And so I'll receive something from the faculty manager saying we need help with this. And so then that's what I'm going to hop on to. Now, when this happens, the student, I may not have ever had that student in the classroom before. So I'm going to help a student that I do not know from anyone else. And I have to shift gears on that from the standpoint of instead of it being a student, here's this person, like Zenobia Xanthopoulos. That's a name I made up. So FERPA is safe. But Zenobia Xanthopoulos, she's having a problem in her classroom, and then it seems like the professor doesn't understand. Well, then I get to deal with that professor, and what's neat about that is I know that the professor has been given a lot of rules to follow. They've gone through new faculty experience, they've been trained, and now they're dealing with a situation that just doesn't fit with the training. And so they get a hold of us and said, "What should I do?" I said, "Okay, how's the student doing? Has the student been on time so far?" "Yeah, the student's been on time." I said, "Can we use a little flexibility with this particular student to see if something's going to be different from here on out?" And I'll tell them, "Hey, you need to hold the student accountable. Hey, look, we can extend this date for 4 days. Will that be enough for you? How much time do you actually need?" And the student will work with the professor quite often on something like that. And the professor, they want to maintain their integrity. They want consistency and they want to model that consistency for the student so the student can have a high level of predictability out of the professor so they know how the professor is going to act. And you know what? In the end of course survey, the student will put that stuff in there. Either they'll put in there this professor's fair grader, the professor always, you knew what to expect out of the professor, or they'll say, who knows what was going on with that person. One day they want this, the next day they want that. And so we want it to be predictable. We want that consistency, but moreover, we want that connection, that human connection. I mean, students are here to have their needs met, but also, they have this academic identity that they're building. And that academic identity has to do with being successful, not just crawling across the finish line, even though they may get a ribbon too. But they want to be successful, and their idea of what success is for some students is way up here in the stratosphere, and then for other students it's on ground level, and the ones on ground level are happy that they are achieving what they never knew that they could achieve before. And here's that professor who I get to work with and talk to him, and I love it because one of the things about this is, in order for me to be a really good advocate, I need to have a relationship with those faculty members also. And they need to trust me just like the students need to trust them. And so then we build this relationship on trust, and then they start to listen, as Nichole was talking about, listen to each other. Because I don't want anybody on the defensive. Let's go on the offensive and let's try to score here, creating a win-win situation. And then what's neat about that is it creates a level of flexibility for that professor in the future. Now, another thing that's important is that as an advocate, I've got to model the behavior that I'm asking for. If I can do that, that's going to make a difference because, when someone is selling something to you, it's far easier to believe them if they really believe in what they're doing themselves. And you can tell when they believe in what they're doing. And so that's where I am on that, and I'm going to stop.
And I love that idea that advocacy often occurs behind the scenes. I think that's a really important idea to kind of hold on to. So I appreciate the perspective for the instructors. Theresa, how do our advisors advocate for their students to help them with their success? How do they facilitate communication with instructors?
Yeah, excellent. I'm going to kind of take a key word that Dr. Woods said was trust. I think building trust with the advisors and their students is the number one priority of our advisors from day one, is building that rapport with them so that students feel they can come to their advisors when they get stuck. One thing that they see a lot of is students aren't sure how to advocate for themselves. So that's the first thing our advisors do, is really with that active listening that Nichole talked about, and discovering exactly what it is the student needs and then going from there. So for example, maybe it's, I don't understand what my feedback is, but instead of emailing the instructor, I need help, because we know there's a long turnaround time. It's advocating and helping that student advocate for themselves to say, okay, let's build out this email so that in the future, you know exactly what you need to do to contact your instructor to get that needed assistance. In some cases, the student has reached out and maybe the instructor just hasn't seen it, or it went rogue and went to like an old email or something like that. our advisors will step in to then address this with the instructor. Say, hey, did you get that email? And 9 times out of 10, they're like, no, I didn't see it. What's going on? I'm happy to help. And so just that little connection can help, foster that relationship between all three of them, because we really want to form a united front in everything we do. And so building that trust, to circle back, really helps with the students and the faculty as well.
That's a good answer. I'm going to switch to asking the questions because Dr. Dillard has not been doing a good job. So we're going to go switch now to the third pillar, which refers to respect, and which interactions are characterized by respect, and they incorporate the inherent value of diverse perspectives. So going back to Dr. Woods, I had to correct myself. I was about to call him William too. So Dr. Woods, showing respect in difficult situations can lead to greater levels of trust between UAGC members and students. Can you share an example when a student disagreed with you at first, if you've ever had anybody in your life disagree with you, but then through extending respect in the situation, you could get to a resolution?
Yeah, there was one of the times, and it wasn't all that long ago, where the student disagreed with me about use of the textbook. And I'm always looking to see the students use that textbook, incorporate it along with other ancillary materials in the class, because I want them to be able to demonstrate how they are learning. And can they take all these different things that everybody in the class is using and then bring their own perspective to the class? Well, one of the things that I have to be careful of is not to be so persistent that it gets demeaning, because at that point, it doesn't seem like you're really understanding the student, and you're not, or that you're student centered. You're just going to grind them down to, here's the rule, here's what you got to do, and you better do it. Otherwise, you're going to get a 0. And that's easy to do to somebody. So this student, I kept on talking to them about using the textbook, and it became fairly obvious after a bit, to me, at least that's what I suspect, that they didn't have the textbook. And so I was contacted by someone out of another department who says, you need to work with this student. And I kind of swallowed hard on that. I didn't like it because I wanted to make sure everybody had the same starting point, which in the classroom, it's how the class is built, what the assignments are, what the discussions are, what the tests are, and you go from there. Well, that's the way it was in my opinion. Well, one of the things that was happening was that the student was getting a lot of other materials to be able to complete the assignments and be able to complete the discussion. So I had to step back and take a look at that and say, okay, are they achieving the course learning outcomes? And are they meeting the weekly learning outcomes? And is this leading to them achieving the program learning outcomes? And so I could affirm that they were doing those things. They just weren't doing it with the same materials as the other students. And so even though I personally didn't like to go to that level of flexibility, I had to up my understanding of the student and think about, man, is this the hill that you want to collapse on because you're not going to work with the student? Is this what you are about as a human being? And I had to agree after a bit, after talking to a couple of people, okay, I can still help this student. And I did help the student, and they did do well in the class, but it was difficult for me at first.
That's interesting. I like that litmus test of going back to the WLOs and the CLOs to address that. That's pretty good when we get kind of entrenched. I think it's also especially relevant in this situation because there's so many students that have so much going on that maybe traditional students don't, and so I think that's a pretty good example and something to go back to. So we're going to move on now to the fourth pillar, and the fourth pillar, which is empower, involves empowering others to speak up, participate, create, learn, and grow. And we'll move over to Nichole again. And how does UAGC encourage and facilitate active participation in decision-making processes?
Yeah, thank you. I do want to say I just really appreciate that example from Dr. Woods and just the vulnerability that was shared and demonstrated because oftentimes, like in this specific question, in order to really encourage and facilitate those to participate and work with us and collaborate and work alongside each other, we have to be open to shifting our own perspectives. And sometimes that means admitting that the first thing that we assume or the thing that we feel isn't just the thing that we should move forward with. So just because I feel this way initially doesn't mean that this is the best way to approach it for this particular student. So I think we've all had that experience, and I love the share. What I would say as far as like demonstrating that we are giving everyone at UAGC an opportunity to be an active participant in decision making. Specifically on the reengagement team, this is where the philosophy of always learning and always growing comes in. For me specifically, I would never assume that I'm an expert in our advisor's role. I learn from our advisors. I know that they're doing the role day to day. They're the ones on the phone with the students more often than I am. And so, just like I like to learn from students directly when I connect with them, I learn best from advisors when I do the same. And we leverage advisors' knowledge and their experience and their understanding of our students to inform all of our processes on the reengagement team. Our staff is not only encouraged to share feedback with UAGC leadership, but they're also actively involved in updating our processes to ensure that students are receiving the type of care that really resonates with them in their education. We actually just went through interviews because we're adding to our team. And one of the things that we always ask a prospective applicant is, how comfortable do you feel with giving feedback? When you come into this team, you're going to be learning all about our resources and our processes, and you're also going to be learning about our students. And if you identify that something isn't working for the students that you're connecting with, we need to hear that from you. We need to know that you're going to be comfortable. Doesn't matter if you've been here for 1 week or 1 year or 10 years, you're going to be comfortable raising your hand and saying, hey, I'm not sure this is working for our students. And so we ask for that feedback from day one, and we want our advisors to feel very comfortable giving that feedback because they're a part of the climate that we're creating here for our students. And they're a part of their own experience here too. The advisor experience is critical because if they feel good about what they're doing, similar to, I think maybe Dr. Woods mentioned this earlier with sales, if you believe in what you're doing, you're going to do it well. Now, the different processes that we influence with reengagement, they impact other departments. And so therefore, collaboration with other student-facing teams is really imperative to ensure that care is felt by the student at every single juncture in our process. So we do have that shared responsibility to deliver a culture of care experience to our students, which is why I really appreciate what Theresa was sharing earlier about that collaboration. So the more we understand not only our own processes, but other teams and what they're doing with students and how they interact with students, the better informed we're going to be in our process to ensure that we're not creating a barrier with another team. And instead, maybe we're adding value or we're adding connection where we can so that the other teams can better deliver to the student experience as well.
That reminds me of what Dr. Naughton was talking about earlier with the currency in different organizations. Either that or I'm just saying that because I thought it might fit in well there. So let's move over to Theresa. We have a robust contact strategy in student services to ensure that UAG students progress into their next courses. How can y'all ensure that advisors feel comfortable sharing what's working and what may need to be adjusted?
Yeah, thank you, Dan. Going after Nichole, she basically like encapsulated what I was going to say. So I'll expand on like student services. We definitely take into consideration the feedback from our advisors when creating our contact strategies. Over the last couple of years, we've made a pretty big move from what we called community advising to a dedicated model. And basically what that is now our academic advisors have a set population of students that they're responsible for progressing through each class, retaining, and getting to graduation. And as those contact strategies were being created, feedback from our advisors was essential because, like Nichole said, they are at the front line. And if there's something that we roll out that doesn't work, it's going to be hard for them and the students to get on board with it. So as we've rolled those out and then also gone back to reassess those things, the advisors have been a big part of providing feedback to kind of navigate where we go for the best student experience. One example of this is we now have a new all skill team. And this was basically what that is it's a team that's just on the front line to help students. So they don't have a dedicated model, they don't have dedicated students. But this was from direct feedback from our academic advisors. We asked, would there be people interested in this? And would those people who wanted to stay with their dedicated students benefit from this? And most everyone said yes. And so this was a direct result of feedback from our academic advisors, this new team. And so really, as we progress and continue to re-look at these strategies, the feedback from our advisors is essential on how that looks.
Can you explain a little more about what the all skills team does?
Yeah. So essentially they don't have, before we were in a community model where we had our advisors kind of doing both things. They were doing, they had their dedicated populations, but they were also available to help any student that called into UAGC. Now what we've done is we have a specific team that is with like an advisors out of the office. It'll go to that team to help assist the student. So they'll assist any student that comes through the line. And what that does is it frees up our dedicated advisors to be available for their specific students to give them that real-time advisement when it comes through. So we're finding it's a win-win for both.
That's pretty cool. I've seen a few other examples in organizations where maybe just freeing up some people to sort of kind of be a catch-all sometimes helps take the load off other people. So Bill, let's move over to you. What are some ways departments can work together to empower students beyond the classroom?
That's a great question. And, we're one big system, and I've heard the word unified mentioned here. And I always like to think of, leverage everyone, get them in the process if we need them, But for example, I'll just give you a few quick examples for the audience. CHAMPS program, I'm very actively engaged with them. I'll give talks at some of their monthly sessions. And also, we've covered elevator speech. We give them a little 3-4 slide presentation. We have them participate. We'll talk about public speaking, and then I'm also there to mentor one-on-one if they need it. So a lot of times I'm empowering them and helping them focus. In addition to that, I've moved a lot of them, if they've got stories that are motivational and inspirational, I'll have the marketing department maybe come in and ask them to do an article on their story. So sometimes that's very uplifting, and it shows that they're empowered and they're moving toward their goals. A lot of coaching and mentoring. One thing that I do too is support the BEST team, the Business Educational Services team. Will present, for example, I've done one at Walgreens. I just did one to CDW. We talked about a topic and we lift them, and we engage with them. So a lot of those students are already in our programs, and then we get some new students looking at this and getting an interest in all of that too. The advising team, I can't say enough for them. Worked really closely with Christy Hamilton. Worked with Nichole. We presented last year, TLC sessions, culture of care. But the one thing that we do with the advisors is we work together. So if there's a problem, my phone might ring, or they might send an email and say, can you help me with this? And of course, we'll get the student's schedule. But sometimes it's even goes further than that, where maybe I'll intervene. It's very rare, but sometimes I'll intervene and say, can I lift them? Can I help them? Can I build their self-efficacy and encourage them? And that goes on a lot. And sometimes by looking at our dashboard, I'll see where some students didn't progress. And if I see something that they haven't been progressing, for numerous months, I might flag that to the particular advisor. And the next thing, they're calling the student. So we're working together to lift. I work with Nichole, Jen Horan. I can't say enough for the advising team. I've also gone in there and given some, whatever you want to call pep talks or speeches or whatever, to build the team even stronger. But those are the things that I like to do, is help the students build their self-efficacy and just give them that little dose of confidence to help them target what they're, help them reset their career maybe if they want to look at something. Because sometimes they're not aiming high enough. They might just want a degree. And I might say, well, you have the potential to do this and you're qualified to now to say, try saying it this way. And all of a sudden they hear that enough times. And the next thing you know, they're standing a little foot taller. They've got a little more confidence. They're moving toward their goals. So setting goals, Dan, and leading, coaching, lifting, and just being there to nurture.
That's cool. Thanks. I appreciate that response. Theresa, we're going to jump right back to you before Nichole so that she can't steal your answer again. How do we ensure that every interaction with our students is student-centered? What tools do we have to ensure that our advisors review a student's file holistically?
Yeah. From day one, really, of an academic advisor's tenure is we focus on making sure, one, they have all the tools that they need to review a student's account, but also to make sure that they understand that the student on the phone with them needs to be the center of their world for that time that they're talking to the student. We know from our perspective that we have a lot going on. They have a lot of responsibilities, they have a lot of things, but our goal is to really make sure they understand that while you're talking to a lot of students, that student may be you may be the only person that they're talking to that day, and to really ensure that their attention is fully on that student. Before they even call the student, we have plenty of tools. We have a new dash that gives them a snapshot of their entire population of students where they can really drill down in to say like, maybe I should look and see which of my students have gone on to a warning status. Have they been contacted? Have they discussed with them what it is they need to do to get off of that? So those are some of the tools that help them really holistically review a student's file, whether it's like they answered the phone and they need to do it on the fly, or if they're preparing before reaching out to the student with an outbound call. Really, bottom line is just making sure that they're focusing on each student every time that they're talking to them, and that they're their number one sole priority every time that they talk to them.
Nichole, have you identified any resources and support systems that can maximize student success at other stages or at various stages of their journey?
Sure. Yes. Thank you for that question. I was thinking about the different tools that we use on the re-engagement team as Theresa was explaining. What I really love about the collaboration that our re-engagement team has with some of the other student-facing teams, I think I mentioned this earlier, but we really need to have a good understanding of what is going on for a student while they're active, to be able to best advise them, even though they're inactive when my team gets them. So all of the students that my team supports are already inactive in class. It might be very recent, it could be today, it could have been yesterday that they were most recently active at the university, but it could be, years and years ago. So our students are looking to return, and that's the immediate need, is to get them back in class. But what we've really realized in our, re-engagement team is that's not enough. We don't want to just put a student back in class and then, send them back and hope for the best. What we've really shifted to is being very focused on a prior advisement was reactive. So we had reactive advisement. You're inactive, you need to get back in class. That's what we're addressing. We're reacting to the situation. We have now shifted to proactive advisement. And that's something that Theresa was mentioning with the academic advising team. When they use that dashboard, they can be proactive. They can start to predict, like, what could this student be facing based on what I'm seeing, based on the behaviors that I'm seeing. So what we've tried to do is oftentimes we'll learn about these tools and we're like, hey, could we get something like that over here? Like, these students are going to be active, but what can we do now to better prepare them so that when we hand them back off to Theresa's team, they're in a better place? And so the re-engagement team has really been learning how we can impact a returning student's journey as they're restarting. And that means that we're not just, addressing the one thing, like, your attendance dropped. No, we're going to also look at things like what have been your patterns more recently. We noticed that you were passing your courses, you were successful moving from one class to the next, and now we're starting to notice that you've dropped a course, you had an unsuccessful grade. We're going to dig into those recent patterns and we're going to ask more questions so that we can predict any future roadblocks. Is the student going to face a dismissal in the future if they're not properly advised on the policies that, they're up against? I will say that the true measure of success in the re-engagement team has truly shifted internally from supporting a returning student to supporting a future graduate. Like, had to instill that in everything that we do so that advisors have like a bigger picture perspective. But it also instills more of a sense of, I would say, importance to the advisors because they feel like they're now a part of a bigger purpose at the university. And so we've had to ask ourselves questions like, what does support really look like? Is the student really better prepared to persist and graduate simply because they worked with our team? And what do we need to review in the student's file? That holistic review. Do we look at grades? Do we look at their attendance in their most recent course? Are we looking to see if that student has been interacting with their academic advisor? And if not, how do we reintroduce them to their academic advisor? Or how do we introduce them to their faculty member in their class that they're returning to? So those are some of the things that we've implemented to make sure that students are not just starting back in class and then continuing on with the patterns that they had before, because obviously we know that those weren't working.
I think that's super interesting, and I think it's interesting also that it's paired with this cultural shift, behind the scenes. Sometimes that stuff gets implemented, it doesn't really mean anything, but you're describing actual changes to procedures and an emphasis on things behind the scenes that's pretty cool. I think that's way more likely to succeed than just get them back in and move along. One's like numbers oriented, the other's people oriented, I guess. So moving on to Dr. Woods, how do you take a student-centered approach in your approach to making decisions about doing what's best for students?
Yeah, I'm going to try and model that right now. Um, I'm listening to the student one. Her name is Nichole Salinas. And I was noticing that Nichole has all of this knowledge and information that allows her to be flexible in her approach. And so I think I need that same thing. And now I was listening to Theresa Sunblade talking, and she said, yeah, you get that student on the phone, and it doesn't matter how many phone calls that you've had that day, you got to make that student feel like that's the only one that you're focusing on and making them feel good and everything. So that's a great example for me. And now Bill Davis, one of the things you guys got to know about him is he's a salesman who has experience from decades. And he knows that in order to get the sale, you got to understand who you're dealing with and focus on them and tailor your efforts to that particular company. And in this case, we're tailoring our efforts to one particular student, student one. And see, one of the things we know about our students is some of them come in here and they like have high self-esteem. They get in that classroom, they may post 2 or 3 days early trying to get things going and everything. And then we have other students who fall back at the behind the pack and they're waiting till day 3 or day 4 to post in the classroom. You may be seeing an example of one student with very high self-esteem, one student with very low self-esteem. But at the same time, we're seeing two examples of two students who decided, I'm willing on this date with UAGC to go in debt if I have to in order to get my degree from them. So you keep that in mind that this is a person who's willing to sacrifice in order to achieve what they really want in their future, which is not only that degree that we're offering them, but also something for their family and even for their grandchildren. Because we know from studies that these students, if they go on to be students, most likely some kid in their family is going to become a student, and then it's going to be a grandchild being a student after a while. And we see sometimes at graduation that we have a mother and a daughter, both of them walking across the stage within a few seconds of each other. and one's modeling the behavior for the other. Well, when we think about us and being student-centered, part of the process that you'll know whether you've hit it right is the proof is in the pudding at graduation. Students are hunting you down. And I hate to say this, but I got to give credit where credit is due. When Bill Davis is at graduation, he gets a crowd of students around him. Hey, it's Professor Davis. They're loving the guy right in that very moment. And say, man, that is something is amazing that they have fixed on you not only in the classroom, but they fixed on you afterwards. And the only reason that's going to happen is because you were able to center in on them, no matter how difficult the situation is that the student is facing. Some students will have cancer. I've had students like that, and you got to work with them on that situation. Some students are going to have a baby during the class, and I had a student like that. And one of the things I always do, so far student center is concerned, Dan, is that I ask them, do you mind if I tell the class that you had your baby, and do you mind if I share a picture of the baby with the class? And they virtually always have told me yes. And so then I put that in there. Then all of a sudden, all the rest of the students are congratulating that person about that baby, and man, it's exciting like that. And so we're building momentum with the student from day one to the day that they get to graduation, and not walking across the stage. They dance across the stage. They're jumping up and down. And man, it's quite the experience. So I just want to say that you want to have a student-centered approach, always think about the student and their needs, whatever level that they're at, and then meet them there, and they'll continue walking with you.
You make me want to go to graduation. So final question, Bill, how can different departments collaborate to ensure students receive the best possible support throughout their journey?
Sure. Well, Dan, I'm going to tell you, here's an example right here, all of us working together. And you're in a department, I'm in a department, we've got advisors here. We're all looking for the greater good. And what William said at commencement, I've seen many students around him. I've seen him doing students' weddings, all kinds of stuff, and he's just a master at that. But the thing I like to say is that when you look at professional selling or managing or taking care of a student, building that trust, that rapport, selling is not a trick. I'm not saying selling here, but you move them through a continuum so they can make a well-informed choice. So if we do a good job handling students throughout the entire life cycle, whether that's when they sign up or Nichole or in the classroom, things just happen. So I would tell everyone here, get engaged across departments, communicate across departments, cultures, generations. I always like to say, I'm 68 going on 47 because I like to think about energy, right? I like to think about reaching out and lifting people. I like to think about I care. I like to think about mattering theory. To William's point, when you're student-centered and it's in the brain and you know what your purpose is, you're having fun. This isn't even work. You're having fun in a meaningful way to lift someone's life. And I have to tell you, I went through commencement with Dana. We've carried the Gonfalon down together, and it's just exciting times and that energy that is in there. So work with library services. Somebody can't outline or something, take the initiative, advocate, as William might say. Connect with those folks. Say, hey, I got a student over here. Can you help them? Can I get them in? If it has to do with library research, connect them to Karen Mighty. If it has to do with student services, talk to them, answer the question, but I have had more fun in meaningful events and days, seeing progress, seeing as William says, the end result, graduation. I mean, that's my favorite time of year. William's always my travel buddy when we fly out to Arizona. And the point is, love this stuff. When you love what you do, it's not even work. Get that passion and purpose connected. That's all I can say is get engaged, stay engaged. And if a student comes to you with, a challenging one, always assume positive intent. Ingrid Newey from PepsiCo, the CEO, used to tell us all the time, always assume positive intent. Don't judge. Don't rush to judgment. Pause. What might they have meant? Or this could be really important to them. And then flex to that, show the empathy. So, Dan, we just got to stay engaged like we're doing here. And I salute you and Michelle for all your leadership in this conference. It's a wonderful summit.
Well, so we also want to thank y'all as well, William, Bill, Theresa, Nichole, for your time and insights as we conclude this session. Thank you for all the viewers for joining us, and we hope you found the conversation inspiring, and we invite you to join us at the day one keynote session coming up in Zoom Room 1.